Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that release, which has been designated by Criterion at spine number 1119. And this is a work from 1951, and the name of the director is Vittorio De Sica. And the name of the work is, and once again, please pardon me for my poor pronunciation of the Italian language, but the name of this film is Miracolo a Milano, or as it's known in English, Miracle in Milan. This is the work from 1951. And it is from that extraordinary filmmaker, artist, director, Vittorio De Sica. And it is written by Cesare Zavattini, based upon his story Totò il Buono. And it stars, among its incredible cast, people like Francesco Golisano, Emma Grammatica, Paolo Stoppa, and others. And the name of the work is, once again, please pardon me, I deeply apologize for my poor pronunciation of the language, but I hope you can forgive me. The name of this work is Miracolo a Milano, or Miracle in Milan, from 1951. My goodness, what an amazing, magical film this is. This is a film that I think can be described in those terms as a type of fantasy, but also with not just hints, but also quite significant helpings of what might be called a sense of the bleak nature of the maybe realities as depicted in cinematic form in the hands of De Sica and company. And what I mean by this is, of course, this is a story focusing in on our central character of Totò, who is the Francesco Golisano character. And we see him from the early parts of the film, early on in his life, indeed, as a baby, as a child, through a very interesting set of circumstances. We see him come into contact and indeed create this very strong bond with the Emma Grammatica character. And through here we understand this idea of where he belongs, the type of family outside of family, and also how he is maybe stricken with certain situations of hardship and poverty, and also a lack of immediate family bonds. But that doesn't stop him, and that doesn't stop his relationship with the Emma Grammatica character from growing and becoming a very sincere and intimate, and indeed an emotional focal point of this story. Because indeed what we understand is, through the various scenarios and episodes of, say, harsh realities, of various impediments that are set up, we see Totò, the young boy, grow up into a young man, and he has to deal with tragedy, sadness, heartbreak, death, and the unexpected, say, surprises that life might bring, and not always very pleasant, not always very bright, not always very cheerful. With all these harsh, bleak realities that are presented within the cinematic landscape of this film, Miracle in Milan, what we also see is the development of this story as we see the young man Totò and his embarking, or his interactions with other parts of the community that he encounters, that are involved in this geographical space of Milano, of Milan. And we see him also get involved with this particular, say, community. It's often described as an impoverished area, a type of shanty town on the outskirts of Milan, where we have a number of people that seem to be experiencing or otherwise undergoing very grave and seemingly serious situations of dire straits having to do with their own impoverished situation. And so this is, of course, in coming from the late 1940s into the early 1950s. We're still in a type of post-war feeling or atmosphere, although some years have passed since the end of the war. But that being said, this landscape is forming the backdrop for a number of potential hardships and indeed actual hardships that confront our hero Toto and his friends and the fellow community members that we see them trying to deal with when we have the external forces, the bourgeois, wealthy forces in terms of the real estate developers, in terms of the people who are trying to take advantage of maybe natural resources that might be discovered underneath the ground, etc., and might be trying to swindle or trick the otherwise innocent members of this community because of various, objectives of greed and wealth and also trickery. So we have all these external forces that are set up that set the stage for a type of a film that is touching upon issues of hardship, issues of, say, casualty, and issues of grave, dire significance that might be said to be part and parcel or consistent with what we understand this cinema movement of what is known as Italian neorealism, especially in the hands of Vittorio De Sica. Might present or might lead into in terms of cinematic exploration. However, what is really quite remarkable about a work like Miracle in Milan is that it is very much a film that is dealing with or touching upon these harsh realities, these types of obstacles that are always placed in front of our heroes, the protagonists, and try, as we as viewers might, to want to root for our characters, want to root for our heroes. Sometimes some of these obstacles might seem within the space of the cinematic frame quite insurmountable indeed, and that creates a sense of suspense and tension and drama and heartbreak, potentially so. But one of the other great parallel, stylistic devices or stylistic approaches or philosophies of this film is also the capturing of the imagination through cinematic terms in a charming way, this idea of magic, this idea of fantasy, this idea of hopefulness and an optimism that is expressed through many forms of the cinematic stylings of Vittorio De Sica and Zavattini and company. So what do I mean by this? So first off, we have a film that is very much also has this sense of being quite optimistic. There is a jubilant spirit to the proceedings, and this is also due to the way in which certain, externalities of the environment are presented, oftentimes or sometimes, and quite surprisingly, in ways that might seem to be very much in the realm of fantasy, in the realm of the extraordinary, or in the realm of even, like the storybook romance, in a manner of speaking. And that is in no way a negative thing. This is used in a way to remind us that this is a film that could be said to be very much an attempt at being a type of feel-good, heartwarming human drama that uses the idea of heartbreak and hardship and financial dire straits, etc., as a backdrop for further augmenting this sense or possibility of the feel-good human drama, the feel-good romance, through various forms of cinematic style, whether it be through the application of, very clever special effects, whether it be through the application of very neatly arranged and stylized, arrangements of character and plot devices as we progress from one scenario to another scenario to another scenario, or whether it be through the earnest nature of the character portraits that we have in question here, and specifically focusing in on the brilliant main character of Toto and his warm-hearted, good-natured, earnest quality through, I think, a combination of these, avenues of of cinematic expression. We have a film that is, on the one hand, described as, or maybe sitting within the context of, on the one hand, or to some degree, as discussed by, for instance, in one of the supplements by David Forgash in one of the supplemental discussions included in the Criterion Collection release, and we'll get to that momentarily. We have, on the one hand, a film that could be said to be sitting within the context of the way in which the harsh realities of, say, post-war Italy were being presented in what is often regarded as the movement in cinema known as Italian neorealism. However, at the same time, we have the very jubilant and quite openly engaged with sense of the magical and the fantastic and the extraordinary and the uplifting and even quite opulent and quite emotionally pleasing and satisfying senses of cinema that also, I think, combine in a very intriguing and unique and quite highly engaging way in the context of the story of Totò and his friends while they're trying to confront the so-called villains of the piece in this story that has, as I say, its strong helpings of the harsh realities, while also having at the same time, in the same, say, breath, a strong helping of the feel-good sensibilities of type of extraordinary optimism of cinema. And this is therefore, I think, that great combination, that great blend of style and substance brought together in the context of this work, A Miracle in Milan. And it becomes a very memorable, engaging, and it's a very uplifting and heartwarming experience for that, while at the same time never losing sight of those, say, the bitter realities or the bitter truths that are hinted at, or maybe even strongly depicted, depending on the type of scenario or episode that we find ourselves engaged with as viewers watching this film take place from beginning, middle, and end. So in that way, this is an incredible balancing act that is an utterly entertaining and very satisfying work of cinema. There's also a sense in which, and I try to allude to this as well, the way in which this type of optimism in the face of, say, bitter realities is expressed in such a fine form vis-a-vis the characters and the way in which the characters are presented. We have to, of course, mention the main character of Totò, and we understand from the very outset that his life is filled with a lot of sadness and tragedy and setback, but he always remains at a type of emotional and a type of, say, philosophical anchor of the film, in a manner of speaking, because despite the various setbacks that we understand his life has experienced from a very, very young age, from when he was a baby to when he is a young man, despite all these various setbacks, he also finds himself in the company of people who love him or who respect him. We also find that type of loving respect is also due to the fact that he has this earnest nature in the way in which he carries himself. There is this unyielding sense of the type of optimistic spirit that carries not just him, but also the people around him, the people that he meets. And this forms a type of, say, a counterweight to the various quote-unquote negative forces that we see at work or plotting against him and against the community, on the outskirts of Milan here. So that type of optimistic spirit, as expressed through the main character Totò, is one of the driving forces of this film. That again, I think, is a wonderful way of exemplifying or representing this great blend that this film seems to represent in terms of a cinematic style. On the one hand, we have the brutal realities and the brutal setbacks, while at the same time a type of espousing of a philosophy of optimism. And that type of blending we can see in the styling of Miracle in Milan. We can also see as exemplified within the very character of Totò himself. And so I find that and by extension, the various relationships that we see him have with the other characters. So this is I think, a really wonderful way of parallel structure. This is also a wonderful way of creating consistency of, as I say, a blending of seemingly disparate styles, but they are, when they are combined in this fashion, in this film like Miracle in Milan, they are not disparate at all. They are indeed very much hand in hand, closely linked, to create this sense of a film that seems to be many things at once. And in the hands of filmmakers and artists and writers like Zavattini and like De Sica, we have truly a cinematic miracle indeed. This is the work which is Miracolo a Milano, or in English, Miracle in Milan. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Miracle in Milan, on this new Blu-ray. It's by number 1119. It is purported to be a new 4K digital restoration, and I've also taken the liberty to remove the booklet, the insert, which is a staple booklet, by the way. Wonderful, wonderful, and I'll get to that momentarily as well later in this video. On page 26, there is a note about the restoration, and it says in part that it is a new 4K digital restoration, and the monaural soundtrack was remastered from the original soundtrack negative. Also, it indicates that Miracle in Milan is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.37 to 1. I should take this opportunity now to indicate, for instance, that there were a number of instances where this film had been released prior to this 2022 release from Criterion. I should mention, for example, a release from Arrow. This is the Arrow Academy release of Miracle in Milan. This is high definition Blu-ray. It also had, in addition to the Blu-ray of Miracle in Milan, it had a DVD of another work by De Sica, which is Il Tetto. So this is a release that I relied upon a lot, prior, of course, to this new Criterion release. I should point out that the presentation, again, my eyes and my ears, I admit, are very amateurish when compared especially to a number of great professionals and great observers and great cinema enthusiasts and reviewers elsewhere, who speak in wonderful detail about the specifics of, say, the video presentation, of the visual presentation. But to my own, my own senses, I can say that this earlier Blu-ray presentation of Miracle in Milan that was presented by Arrow Academy here, this had a sense of a type of it looked, generally speaking, a little bit brighter than what we have in this new current 4K presentation under the Criterion release. But that doesn't make one superior over the other. Let me explain. To me, it feels like the slight, say, the higher brightness of the Arrow Academy release tended also to make the image somewhat flat, in my view. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because it is ultimately a type of two-dimensional image. That is cinema. It's on a flat screen, so there's nothing inherently wrong with that. However, when I look at the Criterion release and I notice the type of textures that are given to, say, shadow, and the type of maybe the deep richness to some of those shadows and some of the darkened corners, I find that there is a sense of almost a three-dimensionality that seems to be heightened when I watch the Criterion release versus when I watch the sort of brighter yet seemingly flatter feel of the earlier Blu-ray of the Arrow release. Now, that doesn't make one, say, necessarily automatically superior over the other per se. It's of course depending on your own, say, frame of reference, as it were. But that's just my general sense based on my own amateur eye, so to speak. Now, that, however, leads me to be very pleasantly appreciative of the Criterion release. I enjoyed it very much, and I enjoyed the sounds, and I enjoyed the sights very much. As I say, there is a texture, there's a richness to it that made it pop out in a way that was very striking. That is not to say anything negative, overly negative against the earlier era release. It was quite remarkable, and it is quite remarkable. And indeed, when we get to some of the supplements, while there are a number of great supplements on the Criterion release, and we'll get to that momentarily, I should point out that the earlier Arrow Academy release does have the wonderful benefit of having another film on a separate DVD disc included with this set. So you get two films for the price of one, in a manner of speaking, when you get this earlier Arrow Academy. So that is one of the great strengths of this, and when compared, say, to other releases like the Criterion release. But in terms of the presentation, I think what we are getting here, from my own perspective, is something very pleasant and very, very warm, and indeed very much, very textured. I think that helps quite tremendously in terms of an appreciation and exploration of this wonderful work, Miracle in Milan. I should also point out, too, just in case one is interested, that Miracle in Milan is a work that had been in the Criterion collection previously, in a manner of speaking. The Laserdisc era of the Criterion Laserdisc catalog included the film Miracle in Milan under the Laserdisc spine number 83, which is right here. And so, in a manner of speaking, we have the return of Miracle in Milan, to the Criterion collection. It had once been this particular Laserdisc, and then we had, of course, the era of DVD and Blu-ray and now 4K. But in that era, we have the emergence or re-emergence of the title back into the catalog, in a manner of speaking. So this is another very neat thing about this release. It is yet another way of recapturing or reminding us of the earlier Criterion history by releasing it in this new form, in this full-blooded, full-of-life release that we have right here for purposes of this 2022 release of Miracle in Milan. And with, like with many other Criterion releases, we have also this release, which includes a number of supplements that are part of the package, and we have some great supplements here as well. So the first supplement that we have is a supplement described as being from 2021, and it is approximately 27 minutes, and this is called Revisiting Miracle in Milan, with Italian film scholar, expert extraordinaire David Forgash. This is truly wonderful, and it really goes at the heart of a number of things that I was trying to allude to in my earlier discussion here in this video discussion. But David Forgash's discussion is head and shoulders excellent and totally superior to anything I might hope to be able to even begin to have a start on in terms of a discussion, let alone follow through. David Forgash's command is, of course, truly brilliant and quite deep in scope and filled with so much knowledge, and he presents it in that wonderful way. And so this 27-minute discussion with David Forgash about this film in the context of Italian cinema, neorealism, and Zavattini and De Sica, and the idea of blending of styles, etc. This is one that I strongly recommend. This is really, really great. For example, David Forgash does speak about the relationship between De Sica and Zavattini, that this is a very important collaboration. He does, of course, remind us, too, of the great collaboration. He reminds us of the great momentous landmark films in the context of De Sica's filmography. And also when he reminds us too about the idea or concept of what is referred to as Italian neorealism in cinema, and this idea of how he uses or he relies upon the scholarship Charles Levitt and the idea of Italian neorealism as being an art of social engagement. And also he describes it in terms of an art of experimentation, which is a very key concept that David Forgash, refers to throughout this discussion. And he also pinpoints the period of years 1945 to 1952. And so we also therefore find that Miracle in Milan could and would fall within that range of years, being a 1951 film. And then he also describes other examples of films that are highly celebrated even now, across the years, across decades. Films that are critically regarded, loved throughout the world for their various handlings of themes and history, and also humanity and themes of humanity. Films like Shoeshine, La Bicyclette, or as it's often translated into English, for instance, a Criterion release, Bicycle Thieves, Umberto D, etc. But then also we have a film, Miracle in Milan. And David Forgash does a really great service to the discussion of this film here. And he talks about the idea or the concept about how this is a film that does show certain, say, hardships, ideas of depictions of homelessness and impoverished situations of certain classes of people, the impoverished nature of our hero and his the friends and the intimate relationships that he makes. However, the harshness of the situations are still relevant and very much visible within the context of the film itself. And so this is, and also David Forgash mentions too about how in the actual production of the film Miracle in Milan, indeed, according to him, a number of the extras, a lot of the extras that were involved in, say, this community aspect of the filming on the outskirts of Milan, how they were actually in real life dealing with their own situations of homelessness, etc. So this is a situation that is not wholly type of a fantasy. This is a film that is dealing with certain very bitter realities that are still confronting a number of people of Italian society into late 1940s, into the early 1950s. So this is a very important point that he reminds us of. He also therefore reminds us too of the sort of political landscape of the late 1940s into the 1950s, and also how this might be in parallel to, or maybe somehow related to, what might be said to be shifts in this concept of Italian neorealism in cinema. And so we have earlier examples during this period of say from 1945 up until the late 1940s of, say, harsh depictions, while at the same time using the idea of experimentation, also using people who were well known as, say, film actors or well known in terms of their screen presence. So these are films that seem to have already a sense of a type of blend between capturing the harsh realities of the situations that were the subject of the stories that were at play in these films, while at the same time also using the tools of cinema, such as stars, such as the studio setup, in order to tell their story. And this also translated to, or was parallel to, maybe shifts in approaches in, say, neorealism, or depictions of neorealism in cinema, or deviations, according to David, or to borrow David Forgash's word, and how this might be seen to be present in a film like Miracle in Milan. However, David Forgash also explains how maybe in Italy, during the time of its release, when the film was released, it did receive a number of criticisms, both from the left and also from the right. From the left, according to Forgash, it was criticized for, quote-unquote, not being hard enough on its criticisms of, say, the excess wealth of the bourgeois classes as they're depicted in Miracle in Milan. And then from the right, it was criticized, according to Forgash, as for those attacks on the bourgeois classes, or those characters, or the bourgeoisie characters here. And it was also criticized for what it was perceived as being maybe a type of a stylistic inconsistency vis-a-vis how the film ends. However, what I really enjoy about David Forgash's discussion here about how this film sits comfortably or uncomfortably in the context of a discussion of cinema, Italian neorealism, what David Forgash does describe too is how, first of all, according to him, it did receive some really wonderful critical acclaim outside of Italy. And then also people like De Sica and also Zavattini did receive a number of accolades, also outside of Italy as well, and this critical appraisal just grew and grew over the years as time progressed. This idea of quote unquote the phrase magical realism, or the hybridity of the film, the wonderful phrase from David Forgash, etc. So, and what he also says here, which I found very, very potent and very quite profound actually, is how he describes the film as and I'm paraphrasing here, it might look strange if we have a rigid definition of neorealism. I find that to be a very profound statement, because what that means is he is essentially saying that if we approach, say, our concept of neorealism, especially when we think about those landmarks of cinema like Bicycle Thieves, etc., when we compare works like that with works like Miracle in Milan, there might be, or there perhaps definitely is, a perceived sense of stylistic difference. But at the same time, according to the argument posed by David Forgash and indeed others, we can still very comfortably consider this within the context of the filmography and works of Zavattini, of De Sica, and indeed within the context of Italian neorealism in cinema, as it's progressing and changing, and the dynamism of it as the years progress from 1945 into the 50s, 1951 into 1952, etc. So I find this discussion to be very incredible. And especially from my vantage point, I am not in any way an academic or scholar when it comes to cinema, let alone cinema of Italian neorealism of the late 1940s, early 1950s. So this type of discussion is very helpful and important one for someone like myself, as well as revealing other aspects of the production. Forgash talks, for instance, about that incredibly important relationship, that collaboration between De Sica and Zavattini, that it wasn't always, there were maybe some moments of friction, shall we say. There was a type of maybe similarities, but also difference in background. Zavattini had a background in terms of writing and publishing. He also had a way in which his writing had a type of satirical edge to it. De Sica had his background not just as a director, but also as an actor and a performer. And so he describes the relationship as again, having those moments of friction. They did fight. There was some issue about the way that Zavattini was maybe depicted or not depicted or indicated in the credits of Bicycle Thieves. And so perhaps, according to Forgash, that might explain how Zavattini's name does appear in the credits of Miracle in Milan. So that is very interesting. But also we have to remind ourselves, or David Forgash does remind us about Zavattini's, the writing and the story, Toto il Buono, and how this idea of this story maybe having its roots in sort of children's fiction, while also dealing with notions of a type of exploration of social realities of the time. And so the contribution of Cesare Zavattini is really quite unparalleled and incredibly important. So David Forgash does mention that, while also, of course, mentioning this in the context of the filmography of De Sica. So all in all, this discussion from David Forgash it is one that should not be missed. This is essential. This is incredibly insightful and very informative indeed. And David Forgash is a wonderful speaker, a presenter of information in this very lucid, very candid, and very wonderful way. So please check this out if you can. Approximately 27 minutes. And then that's not all, because then we have other supplements continuing on. So we have a section which is an interview section, and here we have two interviews that are part of the section. First is with Brunella Bovo, and the second is with Manuel De Sica. And so with Brunella Bovo, this is an interview excerpt, approximately 5 minutes, and here she is speaking about her experiences working on the film. She does appear in a very significant role in the film. So she describes meeting De Sica. She describes the screen test process, shooting on location the scenes with the character of Toto, because she has a number of key scenes with that. And there's she mentions a particular scene, a very lovely scene involving a dove as well, and how this film was very important to her career, and how it is from recollections, it really changed her career, changed the trajectory of her career. So this is a wonderful interview with Brunello Bova, approximately 5 minutes. And then we have the second of these interviews, Manuel De Sica, approximately 7 minutes. And here he is speaking about the idea of the film capturing a social polemic, class divide, because this is a film that has different characters of different class backgrounds and situations essentially conflicting or colliding in the context of this story of the outskirts of the impoverished community, and how they're being confronted face to face with these wealthy investor real estate classes that seem to have very nefarious, underhanded motives about their interactions with this community writ large. So this is a film that is about the class divide. And also the idea too about the way in which the cast was assembled, certain scenes that were assembled, the ending as well, which is also very, it's very important for any film, but in particular it seems for Miracle in Milan, especially in the context of the various blends of, say, realism and fantasy. The ending is quite significant indeed, as well as the collaboration of between De Sica and Zavattini. So here we have another great interview excerpt, this one approximately 7 minutes. But that's not all, because we should also mention here part of this interview section is a third interview. This is an audio interview conducted, according to this information here, in the late 1960s. Gideon Bachman interviewing Vittorio De Sica himself. This is approximately 8 minutes in total, and it's audio, but we have accompanying this when we play it on our players. We have a series of clips and stills as a type of photo montage that we watch as we are hearing the audio excerpted interview. And this is really wonderful, again, hearing from the director himself, talking about his beginnings. Gideon Bachman asks about his beginnings, again, as an actor, as a performer, and his during or prior to the war and during the war, and how he then transitioned into a director of films, a director of comedies, and then how that in turn transitioned into his focus in terms of his directorial efforts in what are films that are described as maybe being classified quite significantly in this movement, or in this cinema called neorealism. So Shoeshine, etc., Bicycle Thieves, Miracle in Milan, Umberto D, this idea of war, the war bringing ruin to the society. And it's not just a physical and financial ruin, but also a type of moral decay or moral ruin within, say, certain classes of characters. And this is definitely part of the landscape of a film like Miracle in Milan, which I think goes towards the argument of David Forgash and others about how this sits comfortably within the context of Italian neorealism, especially in the context of Italian neorealism in the hands of De Sica and Zavattini and others. So I think this description here by De Sica of the idea of not just the physical and financial decay or ruin, but also the moral decay or ruin as well. And this idea too about this need of what De Sica describes as the need for self-expression in the face of a changing reality. And he does talk about his brushes up against, say, certain forces within the Italian government and censorship issues with his films. So for these and other reasons, we have the great audio interview from De Sica himself. So there's another wonderful set of interviews here. This one with De Sica, approximately 8 minutes. And so that's the interview section of the supplements. But then we go to another part of the supplements, which is focusing in on Cesare Zavattini himself, the writer, he's also the writer and the author, and also he collaborated with De Sica, and also he had, of course, his own background and his own career. And so here we have from Italian television this 2019, say, a documentary or focusing in on Zavattini himself. It is totaling approximately 53 minutes. This is truly wonderful. Once again, De Sica's contribution contribution is, of course, incredibly important, incredibly significant. But what's so great about these Criterion supplements here, starting with the Forgash interview and then continuing on through to the interviews themselves, and then now to this sort of documentary on Zavattini, this close-up documentary on Zavattini, which focuses in on the history, the background, the biographical information of Zavattini, his relationship with certain areas of geography, in particular Milan, how that leads to or relates to maybe his work with the story that ended up becoming the source of the material that became the film Miracle in Milan, etc. And the like, and some really interesting anecdotes for chiming in. What's so great about the inclusion of this and the focusing of this is that it reminds us of the incredible importance of this artistic collaboration between De Sica and Zavattini. And so we have some supplements, information within the supplements focusing in on De Sica and his role and his contribution and the relationship with Zavattini. And also we have Zavattini and this focusing in on the artistic sensibilities of Zavattini, his writing sensibilities, what he contributed to this collaboration, this relationship, this artistic relationship with De Sica, and what his career was outside of that relationship as well. And so I really love this inclusion because, again, it reminds us of the importance of this artistic relationship collaboration between these two artists. So Zavattini, well done for being able to include this. I learned so much for this. There are really many charming anecdotes that are shared here as well. So please check it out if you can. Again, this is approximately 53 minutes. And then the supplements are concluded with a trailer, a theatrical trailer to the work. It's always great when we get the trailers included. So here we have another Criterion release with the trailer. So that concludes the supplemental section for the Blu-ray release of Miracle in Milan from Criterion. Now, when we get to the presentation and the booklet, which, as I say, I've removed for purposes of today's video discussion, we have a brilliant, absolutely brilliant cover art design, approach, aesthetics, stylings that are captured in the physical media release here from Criterion. I am so thoroughly impressed with this. First, let us take a moment to admire this wonderful artwork here. We have the cover art. We have here, according to the Criterion booklet, art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustration Manuela Fior, and designer Eric Skillman. Look at this, this illustration, these drawings. These are really beautiful, and the use of the font, which is a reminder of this type of maybe 1940s, 1950s type of font that was used in cinema, perhaps. And we have the back here as well, and let me just open it up here. This is a Blu-ray, and it's housed in this plastic casing, but this artistic illustration style is continued on into the inner part of the casing here, as well as the disc itself. Wonderful, wonderful job. And of course, I removed the booklet, but the booklet would go in here as well on this side of the plastic casing. And speaking of the booklet, this artistic illustration design continues on with such warmth and such affection with this booklet as well. So it has a combination of these drawings, these illustrations, but also we have pictures and stills and photographs as well. And speaking of the booklet, there is also the look and feel of it, the font use, and from all the way down to details like the paper that's used. This is great. I love also the staple booklets. It is robust, it is thick. It means that we have not just a lot of room for these illustrations, drawings, and photographs, but we also have a lot of room for writings. And we have a lot here. We have the essay, which is by Christina Newland, which is "It Is Goodness." And "It Is Goodness" is taken from, or I think it's borrowing from a certain, say, theme or phrase that's very significant in the context of Miracle in Milan and its story. This is a wonderful essay. It's dealing with the balancing act, the various levels and layers of this film, Miracle in Milan. It's talking about De Sica and Zavattini, their relationship, the context of their careers, the context of this film in their careers, the story, the specific themes and the plot devices that are used, etc., etc. A brilliant essay. It is goodness. Once again, watch the film first. After you've seen the film, you can enjoy reading this wonderful essay, the Christina Newland essay, It Is Goodness. That's part of this booklet here. But that's not all in terms of the writings, because what we have next, and this is great, it is Toto il Buono, in English, and it's by Cesare Zavattini and Antonio De Curtis. Toto, and it says here, the following sketch for a film was originally published in the Italian magazine Cinema on September 25th, 1940. And so we have the writing or the story, which is really wonderful to have. It's translated here, a translation here into English, really wonderful. And so we understand this is a story that forms the backbone or basis for what became the story that is Miracle in Milan. So, Totò il Buono. Wow. I've never read this before. I read it, and I was, of course, it's referred to a lot in the supplements. David Forgash's discussion, for example, in the Zavattini documentary, that's also part of the supplements, etc. But then to be able to read it right here in this palpable form, in this booklet form, is utterly amazing. I am so I'm so happy and thrilled. I feel so over the moon whenever Criterion does this. Oftentimes, not always, but sometimes Criterion is able to include the source material, the novella or the short story or something that is the inspiration or basis for the story that is the backbone of the film in question. So here we have another example of that. Bravo for being able to do this, and thank you. This was a real treat indeed, and also the illustrations to boot as well included here. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I am so thrilled with this inclusion, and it is an example of why I think this overall release is it's one of the greats so far of 2022 in my view. It has a look and feel of the presentation that has a wonderful rich texture to it, which I find very pleasant to experience as a viewer. And also we have the presentation, packaging, stylings, and the writings. Overall, incredibly effective. I'm so greatly impressed by this. And ultimately, of course, it comes down to the film itself. And the film remains a marvel, a miracle indeed, a true miracle of cinema. And what a wonder it is. And I'm so glad it's it's in the form that it is here for. So as many people, I hope, can watch it as possible. This is the work from 1951, which is Miracle in Milan. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.